All right, ladies and gentlemen, while we wait a few more minutes, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, and you may request a copy of this presentation via LinkedIn. Well, my specialties are decision making and negotiating. Yes, sir, these are two important areas. First, a word about myself. You might want to know why you should even listen to me, right? So, here we go.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Errol Weerasinghe. He was born in Sri Lanka and was one of 7 kids. His father passed away when he was just 13 years old. At age 16, unable to make ends meet, he started work at a blacksmith shop, making metal rings for cartwheels, and then went on to work at a metal foundry where he cast pulleys. At the same time, he went to night school to obtain the prerequisites for his further education. In 1967, he left Sri Lanka and went on to England, where he worked his way to obtain a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. Having graduated as valedictorian, he went directly to London to get his PhD in fluid mechanics on a full scholarship from the Confederation of British Industries. Subsequently, he practiced as a research scientist and a university professor, and went on to Venezuela where he taught in Spanish at the University of Zulia. In Venezuela, he joined the Shell Oil Company to work in the oil and gas industry. Subsequently, he went on to Abu Dhabi as the head of strategic planning and managed the gas distribution for the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Finally, the family moved to Houston, Texas, where he worked in the oil and gas industry. Even though Dr. Errol was an academic, he was always intrigued by business. During his 25 years in Houston, he owned and operated 2 large retail liquor stores, founded a procurement company, and founded and operated a leasing company. In 1999, he embarked on a career as a management consultant and trainer. In 2013, they moved again, this time to the Silicon Valley in California, to be close to their kids. Today, he offers in-house workshops and public workshops in the areas of analytical decision-making and negotiating.
All right, think for a moment. Our lives revolve around knowing what we want and getting what we want. Yes, sir. That's everything that we do. Knowing what we want is making a decision, and getting what we want is negotiating. Let's face it, every action we take is driven by a decision, and every interaction we engage in is a negotiation, be it a text message, an email, a phone call, or a meeting. Thus, you must strive to make the optimum decision each time, because with each suboptimal decision, you leave money and opportunities on the table. Additionally, you must be able to defend your decision in front of stakeholders, be it a supervisor, an investor, a judge, or even your spouse. So, let's take a look at decision making. What type of decisions do you make? On the business side, probably strategic decisions, bid evaluations, procurement, asset allocation, site selection, etc. And on the personal lives, we have to deal with careers, education, buying a home or a car, investments, retirement, etc. Enhanced decision making and negotiating skills will save you thousands of dollars, not forgetting the nightmares and the heartbreaks. Now, what about famous companies? Do they make bad decisions? Let's take a look.
It's natural to think that judgment, experience, intuition, logic, common sense, etc. is the way to go. In the good old days, this is how great leaders went about their business. Of course, you don't hear of the sob stories and the fiascos. For example, TWA and Pan Am, the pioneers of air travel, are no more. Bad decisions at Kodak led to their bankruptcy. Billionaire Ross Perot admitted that 2 of his worst decisions were declining partnership opportunities at Home Depot and Microsoft, each worth billions of dollars today. In 2008, Yahoo rejected a $44.6 billion bid from Microsoft. And then in 2017, when Yahoo was put up for sale, Verizon grabbed them for just $4.5 billion. When startup Netflix approached Blockbuster CEO to partner with them, he laughed at the proposition. But a few years later, Netflix forced the bankruptcy of Blockbuster. Coca-Cola invested millions of dollars in developing and launching new Coke, yet they were forced to withdraw it just 3 months after launch. In 2014, Microsoft acquired Nokia for $7.2 billion. And then in less than 2 years, they sold it to Foxconn for just $350 million. A loss of approximately $7 billion in less than 2 years. Similarly, Google acquired Motorola in 2014 for $12 billion. And guess what? Again, in less than 2 years, they sold it to Lenovo for just $2.9 billion, a loss of approximately $9 billion. What were they thinking? Decision making, I suppose. Bad decisions can indeed have catastrophic consequences.
So, if the likes of Yahoo, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Google, Blockbuster, Microsoft, Kodak, etc. could screw up, what about you? In fact, world-famous coaching guru Marshall Goldsmith wrote a New York Times best-selling book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. What about data scientists? I have no doubt they are very, very valuable people, especially in this age of big data. They gather, analyze, and project data. They look for causal effects and correlations. They're extremely valuable. However, they are not decision makers. They too need to be trained. Imagine you have a 14-year-old daughter who says, Mommy, Daddy, I want to be a model. So you take her to a modeling school. And the teacher says, okay, honey, let's train you to walk. And the young lady says, no, I've been walking since I was 2.5 years old. But the teacher says, honey, models need to be trained in a special way. When I tell, let me help you make decisions, you're going to say, oh no, I'm the VP. I know how to make decisions. So my struggle is to get you to unlearn and to create belief in you. Lee Iacocca, the former chairman of Chrysler Corporation, said, the greatest obstacle to learning and discovery is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge. Yes, sir. So before we take off into the world of decision making, let's clear the runway and get our heads straightened out. Any questions on what we learned just now? Please feel free to ask. Some fundamentals. What is decision making? It is selecting one or more from a set of available alternatives. What decision making is not, it's not problem solving, it's not creative thinking, it's not feedback control, and it's not implementation. We must get this thing absolutely clear. These are essential for the whole process, but this is not decision making. Problem solving is not decision making. Imagine you're driving your car one morning and the red light comes saying service engine. So you take it to Jim, your mechanic, and says, hey, what's going on, Jim? And he says, let's run diagnostics. He comes back and says, you've got a gear train problem. Naturally, you ask, what should I do? He says you can repair the car, but I cannot promise a shelf life. Or you can replace it with a repaired unit. Or install a brand new unit if you got a few extra dollars. While you ponder over this, he comes back and says, hey, your car's knocking a few years, you might want to sell. So who did what? Jim solved your problem and gave you 4 options, but you must make the decision because Jim doesn't know anything about your personal life, that your daughter could use this for college, local running, or your mother-in-law could use it, or you could donate it for tax write-off, whatever it is. Jim is not aware of your problems. The president of a nation or an organization does not solve problems. He or she makes decisions. Problem solving is unique to the problem, to the domain expert. The TV mechanic knows how to fix that. The car mechanic knows how to do that. Decision making is unique to the person. It's about human judgment. So to summarize briefly, problem solving requires creative thinking, while decision making requires critical thinking. Thus, we need to develop our expertise in both these areas. There are 2 broad categories of decisions. Category number 1 is data-driven decision making. These are decisions made by machines to operate systems, machines, humans, etc. The elevator you ride on, or the car you drive, or the washing machine, these are all data-driven machines. Now there's a second category which we call feelings-driven decision-making. These are decisions made by humans with feelings to serve humans and to operate systems. Additionally, there are several types of decisions we must address. Strategic decisions are very complex and difficult to model, such as socioeconomic, geopolitical, ethnic, racial, etc. Then there are operational decisions that can be dealt through experience, judgment, intuition, etc. Then there are reactions, which are also decisions, must be quick and decisive. Finally, we have resource investment decisions of time, money, effort, etc. These should ideally be modeled, especially if the consequences are serious. Let's look at two very different companies. Dean Foods, the largest milk producer in the USA since 1922, and we were a startup with a $47 billion valuation. They both filed for bankruptcy in 2019, and that was before COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you are a mere startup or an industry giant, no company is safe. Remember, what got you here won't get you there. In 2018, Jeff Bezos told employees, Amazon is not too big to fail. He said Amazon will ultimately fail. He's a courageous CEO. Let's go back to the times before Google and the internet. It is the year 1950, and there's no internet, and your grandpa is buying a camera. So he looks at some magazines with glossy pictures, talks to friends with cameras, and goes to the local camera shop that might have 5 or 10 cameras and buys one. But today we Google and we are faced with information overload, hundreds of reviews, big data. Then we go to a camera shop. What do we see? Hundreds of cameras, choice overload. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the internet, it is now possible to be extremely well informed and yet make suboptimal decisions at the same time. What about big data in the corporate world? Take an executive, he has to deal with manpower, distribution, budgets, sales, a whole host of things, right? Somehow he manages, but he's dealing with big data. So how do we make decisions? How do we cross this bridge from information to a decision? For most of you, your bridge is nothing but logic, intuition, judgment, experience, etc. Have you ever asked, how robust is my bridge? Or can I trust my bridge? Any questions? I'm happy to hold on for a few minutes to give you a chance to ask some questions. I know I'm going fast, but I need to get as much information as I can for you. Imagine your company is having a logo design competition, and the CEO says, hey, to encourage people to participate, why don't we give 5 laptops to the 5 best ideas? Your boss doesn't want to get into the details and asks you to buy 5 good laptops. And you know nothing about laptops, so you talk to the IT department. And they say, oh, you came at the right time. We just did a study and we have the data for you. Here we have the criteria. Here we have the candidates. And we have all the data that you need. You're thrilled. You don't have to do any work. It's all in front of you. But then reality dawns on you. How would I decide? And more important, how would I defend my decision before the big boss? So let's see how people make decisions. No doubt some of us will pray for divine guidance. Others might go to a fortune teller. Now, don't laugh at this because Nancy Reagan was well known for having a psychic predict the fortunes. You might make your own decision as a dictator would. If you're smart, you'd grab a few buddies and call it a team and seek a consensus. If you're the IT department or a procurement department, you have to follow established rules. Insurance companies and the weatherman They rely on pattern recognition. Of course, gambling is just another option. Wisdom and logic. If you're super smart, you would delegate and wash your hands off this decision-making process. You could even postpone and hope it'll never come to pass. Then your spouse reminds you of tradition and superstition, and you say, "What is that?" And he or she reminds you that high-rise buildings don't have a 13th floor. And next time you fly on a plane, there is no row 13. Even Airbus and Boeing are aware of superstition in their decision making. Finally, you could resort to analytical methods. Let's consider an example that most of us have to face: buying a home. This is what I call a multi-criteria decision. You and your spouse have retired and are planning on moving to a more suitable location in the USA. How would you go about deciding on a place to live? You start with some criteria. Do you want to live in a warm climate or a cold climate? What about home prices? What about doctors' offices or hospitals? Maybe pollution and crime are issues of concern. And you want to be close to family too. So these are valid criteria. I picked 7 cities. I've changed the names there and gathered all the information from Google. Looking at this, can we make a common sense decision? Oops, too much information. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not too much information. It's simply you are not trained to handle big data. This could be selecting a supplier, hiring an employee, site selection, etc. Let's talk about fundamentals. Decision making is part art, which is about feelings, and part science, which is dealing with uncertainty and probability. The decision making process starts with an objective. Do I want to get married, get a job, change a job, relocate to a small town, whatever it is, go on a vacation? Then we find the candidates. These are the options or likely solutions. And finally, we make decisions, relying on the 12 methods that I outlined earlier. In future, ladies and gentlemen, don't make a decision without criteria. Criteria are factors that influence the decision. So now we have C&C, criteria and candidates. So we need a process to arrive at the decision. The role of the decision maker after having defined the objective is to what? Identify the criteria. These are the needs, wants, and assumptions. Identify the candidates, the potential solutions. And finally, interpret the data in the prevailing environment, which is all about feelings. Interpreting the data and information is the key here. What do you see in this picture? Most of you probably would see a frog, right? But I could manipulate you and rotate the picture. And now you would see a horse. So I can make you decide the way I tell you to. Any questions? Let's now talk about perils and pitfalls. There are 3 principal reasons why we gravitate to suboptimal decisions, and also why we worry over the decisions we make. 1, we are in an age of big data with uncertainties in an ever-changing environment. 2, we humans are irrational beings with inherent biases that impact our decisions. And 3, we are victims of decision manipulation and contamination. I will now elaborate on these, and hopefully you will be inspired to learn how to make better defensible decisions. Okay, first let's talk about decision making in the age of big data. Think of companies such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, etc. These are some of the richest companies in the world. But what is the common factor that makes them industry giants? Data, data, data. They all make their money with data. In fact, data is the new currency. So it is no surprise that we are being bombarded with data. Let's go back 50 years. Imagine you're a 20-year-old young man in a small town. How would you go about finding your soulmate? Maybe from your neighborhood, your church, college, workplace, the local gym, or a place that you frequent. The selection pool is likely to be small, maybe half a dozen potential candidates. But today, young folks go on to an internet dating site and enter their requirements. The program would then scan thousands of potential candidates worldwide and might present around 20 suitable candidates. While it's great to have a large selection, deciding on the best candidate from so many just became a nightmare. Sadly, most folks are still not convinced. So let me present another simple example. Let's go back to the times before Google and the internet, and your grandpa is planning on buying a camera. Remember, these are times before the internet, so he looks at some magazines with glossy pictures, chats with friends who have cameras, and visits a local camera shop that might have 5 or 10 cameras and buys one. But today, he would Google and he would be faced with information overload, big data, hundreds of reviews of cameras. Then he goes to a camera shop, and what does he see? Choice overload, big data. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the internet, it is now possible to be extremely well informed and yet make suboptimal decisions at the same time. In these two examples, we demonstrated that you would be struggling to make the optimum decision in the age of big data. Yet, some of us would say, no worries, I can make the optimum decision. Here, even AI cannot help us because AI is not capable of incorporating our feelings into the decision-making process. While data is growing exponentially, how we use this data has not changed. We still rely on common sense, intuition, logic, experience, judgment, etc. Ideally, our common sense, logic, etc. need to be reinforced with analytical techniques. Number 2, let's talk about human irrationalities and inherent biases. If you have a brain, you have biases. All decisions are subjective and are driven by biases and personal interests. There are many well-known biases. I don't have time to go through every one of them, but I caution you to be aware of these.
Almost without an exception, we like to think that we make rational decisions. However, highly reputable organizations have studied human behavior and its impact on decision making. Their conclusion is that we really don't know our preferences that well, and this leads to suboptimal decisions. The bread machine. Williams-Sonoma is a high-end kitchen equipment retailer, and they conducted this experiment with a bread machine. When an $85 bread machine was introduced, it did not sell well. Rather than remove the product from the shelves, they introduced a $135 bread machine and placed it right next to the cheaper one. Guess what? Sales of the cheaper machine increased dramatically. Conclusion. People felt they were getting a bargain. Now they were focused on which one, not whether they even needed a bread machine. What about the conflict between heart and mind, the interplay in consumer decision making? This is a study done at the Washington State University and Iowa State University. A group of students were asked to remember a 2-digit number. A second group was asked to remember a 7-digit number. Then they were offered a choice of a plate of chocolate cake or a bowl of fruit salad. Amazingly, a statistically significant number of those who had to remember the 7-digit number chose chocolate cake. Later they admitted that they should have opted for the more healthier fruit salad. Conclusion. Under stressful conditions, we tend to settle for a more comforting or soothing decision rather than an optimal one. New York plastic surgeon Derek Antel looked at the jaw lines of Fortune 500 company CEOs. Here we see Carly Fiorina and Steve Ballmer. He found that about 90% of the top CEOs had a prominent chin. You might ask, so what? Well, only 40% of the general population has a protruding chin. Conclusion. When it comes to decision making, perception still reigns. Somehow we have a notion that those with prominent chins would make good CEOs. Sounds funny. Business Week magazine published this article. Students were wired up and put through
an MRI machine. They were asked to taste samples of wine with the price tag displayed. Unbeknown to them, the same wine was presented with two different price tags, a $5 actual price and a fictional price of $7.99. Guess what? All of them preferred the more expensive wine. Dr. Sheena Iyengar conducted a jam test at a supermarket. In this test of buying habits, varieties of jam were placed on a table. On some days 6 varieties were placed, and on other days 24 varieties were placed. Crowds were excited irrespective of how many were presented. However, the sales figures told a different story. When 6 were presented, 30% of customers purchased jam. However, when 24 were presented, only 3% purchased. Conclusion: people, confused by too many choices, opted not to make a decision. Behavioral scientists present the following conclusions. Our decisions are influenced by preconceived notions. If there are no options, people tend to procrastinate and avoid making a decision. If there are too many options, people are confused, hence reluctant to make a decision. With a few options, people are more likely to make a decision, but they are focused on which is the better option, even if a decision is not warranted. Perceptions and herd mentality drive our decisions. Under stress, we tend to settle for a more comforting or soothing decision than an optimal one. Question: how many of you agree that your decisions could be affected by these types of human tendencies? Behavioral scientists tell us where, how, and why we go wrong, but they don't really tell us how we can minimize the impact of such failings. This is our role. We help people make better, defensible decisions.
Again, I will make a bold statement that all decisions are feelings driven. Some of you might disagree, but I will justify this statement with conclusive arguments. Imagine 10 friends contributing $1 a week and buying lottery tickets. Lo and behold, one day they win a jackpot of $10 million. They share the prize with each receiving $1 million. Now they all visit a financial planner who offers them two potential investments: a fixed deposit of 3% and an annuity yielding 8%, with a small chance of losing some of the capital. He then asks them what percentage of their winnings each person would place in the fixed deposit. I'm sure you'll agree that each person would invest a different amount in the fixed deposit. What I just showed you is, given the same data, different people would make different decisions. This is what I refer to as data-supported, feelings-driven decision-making. Let me relate a real-life event somewhat embarrassing to the US government. You may have heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is where the US dropped the first atom bomb in August of 1945. Initially, the Defense Department identified Hiroshima and Kyoto as the target cities. However, Secretary of War Henry Stimson objected to Kyoto being bombed. But why? When Stimson was the governor of the Philippines, he spent his honeymoon in Kyoto, and he had fond memories of this culturally rich city. Of course, unable to convince the Pentagon, Stimson persuaded President Truman to replace Kyoto with Nagasaki. Hence, today we have Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As you can see, personal biases can influence even US national defense-related decisions. One other example with scientific evidence to support this idea. At Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, an experiment was carried out with mice. Mice were made to smell wintergreen, which is a herb with a distinct smell. While they were smelling the herb, mice were subject to a mild electric shock. Guess what happened? The next 7 generations of mice were scared when they were placed close to wintergreen. Yes, sir. The scientists concluded that our experiences are not in our body nor in our mind. It is being passed through our DNA or some type of consciousness. Hence our irrational behaviors. Let's face it, you won't accept that I pick a soulmate for you, right? You want to pick your own? that you're comfortable with, even if your biases would contaminate your decision. While we do realize that our decisions might be contaminated by our biases, we do want our preferences to be reflected in our decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, beware. Bias carries a negative connotation, while we accept preferences as an essential part of who we are. In conclusion, we are indeed irrational human beings with personal biases that drive our decisions. While it's true that we can never totally eliminate the influence of biases on our decisions, we can certainly manage them to minimize their negative impact on our decisions. Okay, finally, let me address decision manipulation and contamination. Getting us to spend our dollars is big business. There is a plethora of techniques that marketers use to manipulate our thought process. In the interest of time, I will discuss just a couple. Ghost options. Vendors place the ghost option to direct consumers' attention to another item on offer. Let's watch a short video of a study conducted by world-renowned behavioral scientist Dan Ariely.
Two examples of this principle. This was an ad from The Economist a few years ago that gave us three choices. An online subscription for $59, a print subscription for $125, or you could get both for $125. I took this and I gave it to 100 MIT students. I said, what would you choose? And these are the market share. Most people wanted the combo deal. Thankfully, nobody wanted the dominated option. But now, if you have an option that nobody wants, you would take it off. Right? So I printed another version of this when I eliminated the middle option, and I gave it to another 100 students. Here's what happens. Now the most popular option became the least popular, and the least popular became the most popular. What was happening is that option that was useless in the middle was useless in the sense that nobody wanted it. But it wasn't useless in the sense that it helped people figure out what they wanted. In fact, relative to the option in the middle, which was only the print for 125, the print and web for 125 looked like a fantastic deal. And as a consequence, people chose it. The general idea here, by the way, is that we actually don't know our preferences that well. And because we don't know our preferences that well, we're susceptible to all of these influences from the external forces.
Banks, supermarkets, restaurants, phone companies, they all use the ghost option frequently. In fact, you may have noticed that McDonald's offers fries in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. The medium is presented and priced with the sole intention of driving the consumers to purchase the larger fries. The next, I want to talk to you about priming. Priming involves exposing someone to a stimulus that influences their subsequent thoughts, behaviors, or decisions without them being consciously aware of it. This can shape their responses and create a bias towards a particular way of thinking or acting.
Let's talk about behavioral economics.
Dr. Daniel Kahneman received a Nobel Prize for his work in the area of behavioral economics. This past chicken sends this nice bottle of champagne I have here. These people think they're about to use slow, sensible System 2 to make a rational decision about how much they would pay for a bottle of champagne. And with the help of a bag of ping pong balls, we can influence that decision. I've got a set of number balls here from 1 to 100 in this bag. I'd like to reach in and draw one out at random for me, if you would. First, they've got to choose a ball. Number says 10. 10. 10. 10. They think it's a random number, but in fact it's rigged. All the balls are marked with the low number 10. What we do is purposefully we give people a first decision that is clearly meaningless. 10. Okay. Would you be willing to pay £10 for this nice bottle of vintage champagne? I would, yes. Yeah. Okay. This first decision is meaningless, based as it is on a seemingly random number. But what it does do is lodge the low number 10 in their heads. Now to the real question, where we ask them how much they'd actually pay for the champagne. What's the maximum amount you think you'd be willing to pay? 20? Okay. £7. £7, okay. Probably £10. A range of fairly low offers. But what happens if we pry people with a much higher number, 65 instead of 10? What does that one say? 65, okay. It says 65. How will this affect the price people are prepared to pay? What's the maximum you would be willing to pay for this bottle of champagne? 40? £45. 45, okay. 50. 40 quid? Okay. 50 pounds, 50 pounds?
Yeah, I'll pay 50 £80.
350.
Yeah.
Logic has gone out the window. The price people are prepared to pay is influenced by nothing more than a number written on a ping pong ball.
What happened to your logic? Huh? Those who picked the number 65 were willing to pay a high price, while those who picked the number 10 were not willing to pay a high price. They were being primed and manipulated, and they did not even know it.
Okay, we got through a lot very fast, I know. It's time to wrap up. Hopefully you gained some new insights from this session on decision making. So let me recap. Is it not true that our lives revolve around knowing what we want, which is making a decision, and getting what we want, which is negotiating? Yes. Is it not true that at some point in our lives, we will have to make decisions pertaining to careers, education, buying a home or a car, investments, retirement, etc.? I'm sure you'll agree. Is it not true that in life we don't often get what we deserve? We get what we negotiate. The evidence was irrefutable. In today's age of big data, we need to reinforce our common sense, gut feel, logic, intuition, etc. with analytical techniques. We are indeed irrational human beings with biases that negatively impact our decisions. And 3, we are victims of intentional decision contamination and manipulation. So what next? Just say, oh, insightful presentation. I was inspired. Very useful information, etc. And then go back to making the same decisions, right? With common sense, logic, intuition, etc. Knowing fully well that your feelings would contaminate your decisions. Honestly, it's time that you learn how to remedy this situation. Otherwise, you will continue to lose money and miss opportunities with suboptimal decisions and poor negotiating. Take our on-demand course at learn.expertus.com. Hang on, now we have an irresistible offer for you. Take the free 4-minute self-assessment and receive a $30 gift certificate, which you can use when purchasing our courses. Additionally, we have a limited time offer. Buy the decision-making course and get the negotiating course free. And finally, all courses include our decision-making software, a $200 value. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Take a minute to connect with me on LinkedIn.